I'm Mary Talbot. This is Bryan Talbot.
And I'm not.
It's always good to come because it's such a lively atmosphere and there's so much going on. But this year has been particularly good because of the Strip Fest element to it. And there's so many people here that we know, it's just great.
It's a great event. I mean, for the fact that the public can come in free, and the bookshop, but they just pay for individual events is great. But this Strips being part of it this year, it's just another sign of how much comics are being accepted by the mainstream, which is great. Well, I can remember the headlines, comics aren't for kids anymore, about 30 years ago. And that was like the first boom of graphic novels, spearheaded by Mouse and Watchmen and Dark Knight. But at that time, after you'd read a dozen books, there wasn't that many more for anybody who was just discovering comics to read. So they pick up a Spider-Man or something and read that and they go, well, this is not Watchmen, But now, 40 years later nearly, there's a wealth of graphic novels now. There's a whole canon of quality work. There's far too many to read, actually. There's enough to sustain this interest, so that anybody discovering graphic novels for the first time now has, it's a shed load of these books to read.
There's a lot more women writing comics. Yeah. And there's a lot more women, not unrelated fact, a lot more women reading them. There's just such a wealth of different stuff available. It's brilliant. Personally, it was very gratifying. Of course, my first foray into graphic novel writing being one that won this enormous accolade, this literary award. For comics generally, it's been a marvellous, celebration, I suppose, further acknowledgement of how valid it is as an art form, that it is a literary form, an artistic form.
It does seem to be part of the zeitgeist, though. There's lots of stuff happening, this year. We've got, for the first time, a European-style comic art festival happening in Kendal in October. We've got all sorts of events going on everywhere. There is a lot of public interest in it.
Well, I think it was Bryan who introduced me to comics when I was a teenager. I mean, we've known one another over 40 years. And I've always read them from time to time. I've never been such an avid reader as Bryan. I've been reading them much more recently because there's more stuff to my taste. I mean, the kind of storylines which are of interest to me. I'm not particularly a superhero person, probably fairly obvious. But there's so much other stuff now, so many other genres now for people such as myself. As I say, I'm much more of a reader now than I used to be. I like very much reading memoir. I like this more literary kind of fiction, and there's a wealth of stuff there now for me.
I've just always read comics from before I went to school, and started with nursery comics. So I can't really say when I started reading comics.
I've always liked illustrated stories. I've always been, I love illustration. I'm not an artist myself, but I can appreciate it, And to have story which is also illustrations, it's just perfect. I worked on the script alone. I mean, I was doing a lot of research for it first, and then I produced a first draft of a script, and Bryan hadn't looked at it until it was finished. We talked about it, of course, at the dinner table and stuff, but it was only when I'd written a complete draft that he started to have any real input in it. In fact, it was really once you started at the drawing board that you really started to have an
influence. Because at that point I'm adapting the script onto the page. Yeah. So very often I was suggesting such changes in dialogue and stuff like this, making the transitions easier, making things clearer. But it was a very, very organic collaboration, and it was very,
very close.
You can imagine
us living in the same house.
What I use is usually collaboration with an artist, especially for American comics. It's you receive a script from the writer, and you draw it, and that's the end of the collaboration.
Not in this case.
With Dotter, it was practically on an hourly basis. It was a lot of give and take, and it was very easy, actually, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, they can discuss any issues, comics. Not just that, but anything. And I think any subjects that can be treated by theatre or film or prose fiction, you can deal with just as well in comics.
Yes, having the visual representation, depiction of something gets it across very quickly and very immediately. For example, a playground scene in Dotter, I mean, it's having it represented that way saves so much description and analytical work because it's there in front of you, you know. I'm talking about girls and boys being segregated into, you know, where boys go and where girls go, and you can just show it with girls and boys literally inscribed in stone over the doors, you know. It's very economical.
I mean, the first comics, they were aimed at, you know, upper class, middle class readership. You know, the Victorian comics, things such as Punch, you know, which did run comic strips, and the weekly, you know, comic supplements. They had so, you know, that's where the word comic comes from. The so-called humorous, you know, supplements with Victorian newspapers weren't aimed at the working class. Although, as the 19th century went on and mass education started becoming more widespread, and you know, blue-collar workers became, you know, more educated, they started reading them. And I suppose at that point, yeah, it was very accessible to working people. Well, we just finished Sally Heathcote's Suffragette, Mary's next book.
Which was a collaboration which went three ways because the artist on it was Kate Charlesworth, Edinburgh-based artist. It's been wonderful. I mean, that was a massive amount of research again on the suffragette movement because it's very historically grounded and it's about factual events. And what it does is it takes a fictional character through those events. Sally Heathcote is a maid-of-all-work at the beginning in the Pankhurst household in Manchester. And she gets sucked into it all and radicalised and becomes a radical militant suffragette.
Yeah, it's a cracking story, apart from being very educational, actually. And at the end of the book, Mary has over 20-30 pages of notes, you know, all the historical detail and reference for it. And yeah, Mary wrote the script, and I did I've done all the lettering and the lettering placement and the page layouts and the panel compositions. And Kate's done the finished art. So in a way, sort of Mary's been the script writer, I've been the director, and Kate's been performed it, you know.